Welcome back to the channel. In today's video we are moving on to the next episode of my category breakdown series, and in this video we are taking a look at Best Cinematography. And as always, if you're new to this series, basically all this is we're just taking a look at every single individual category at the Oscars, and we're taking a look at all of the nominees. So first we're going to announce the nominees and talk about some facts about them, then we're just going to talk about their nomination in general, and then at the end I'm going to give you my personal ranking of the nominees and my prediction for how likely it is that I think they win the Academy Award. And we're still a couple weeks out from the Oscars on March 2nd, so a lot of this isn't necessarily in terms of my predictions. Nothing is set in stone. Just know that I'm going to do another final Oscar predictions video that'll come out a couple days before the Oscars. So up until then, a lot of this is still flexible, and I'm willing to move and change things around. This is just what I'm currently feeling at the moment, but we are getting to that point where some of these precursors are starting to happen, so what I'm feeling at the moment is kind of a nice little blend of what I think could happen. And without further ado, let's take a look at the nominees. The first nominee is The Brutalist. Cinematography by Lal Crawley. This is Lal Crawley's first Oscar nomination. The last two feature films he shot were Noah Baumbach's White Noise in 2022 and Stephen Karam's The Humans in 2021. The Brutalist was nominated for Best Cinematography at the BAFTAs and the Critic Choice Awards. The Brutalist is such a fascinating film to discuss in terms of its cinematography because there's just five different unique, different talking points, different areas I can go with this. The first thing obviously being that it's shot on VistaVision, something that the previews and even you'll see in my graphics, the Brutalist title card that I use, says The Brutalist in VistaVision. They make sure that you're aware that they brought in these big different cameras, and you can tell it does create a beautiful cinematography, just beautiful look to the film, especially if you were able to go see the Brutalist on the big screen, which if you haven't, make sure you block out, a night, block out 4 hours of your day to be able to go see the Brutalist on the big screen, because it is just so beautiful. Both times I've seen it, I've been just blown away by the sheer beauty of how it looks on the big screen. Just being shot in that VistaVision with the VistaVision cameras, that's the first thing you gotta highlight. The second thing you gotta highlight with the Brutalist's cinematography is just how beautiful so many different shots look. And I think a lot of it is more so it's just kind of almost like the staging of the shots, the way that they were able to stage it and then let the light either come in, whether it's natural light they're shooting with or just however they're framing the light, to be able to get these at these perfect moments. And the best example is really just the entire in the beginning of the film when Laszlo and his cousin, they're going and they're redoing the library for Guy Pearce, unbeknownst to Guy Pearce at that point, but when they're redoing that whole library, just that entire scene is so beautiful. Going in and you already see the original library, and you think oh, this is a fine home library, and then but seeing the way that they're able to kind of tear it apart and then bring in this whole thing. So I think the first thing that kind of catches your awe and your amazement in that scene is kind of more so the production design element of it, but it really is just, it comes through, especially the shot where he's got the chair and he kind of is bringing it over to the light that's coming through the window in the circle. Just the entire way that entire scene is shot is just so beautifully done. The next thing that you have to talk about when you're talking about the cinematography of The Brutalist is the way that they were able to decide to do some of these scenes, the upside down shots, right? The entire idea of him walking out of on the ferry, looking up, seeing the Eiffel Tower upside down. That is just such a creative, fun shot and decision that you're able to do with your camera, that I think is something that looks really cool, and is something that as someone that watching the movie, you might think initially that it's just kind of this weird decision to make. But then as the film goes on and you realize that there's more to that, the idea of seeing the Statue of Liberty upside down, but also just how it kind of comes into play later on in the film, the idea of the upside down being a thing that comes in. There's a shot, I don't want to give anything away because obviously it's a great film and you need to make sure that you're seeing it, but there is a shot right at the end of the film, kind of, I think it's the last shot that before they cut to the epilogue. I think it's the last shot there of something else being upside down, and it's kind of this cool this thing here where we see at the beginning of the film, we see the Statue of Liberty upside down. At the end, we see something else kind of upside down, and kind of just what that represents for this character and for his journey through America. I just think that there is just some cool kind of symbolism that is brought in there. And then the last thing that I kind of want to highlight here with The Brutalist in terms of its beautiful cinematography is something that you can talk about with every film, right? That has great cinematography, but it's just the staging of the scenes, being able to, even these kind of normal scenes, Laszlo and his cousin kind of hugging outside of, as the train's kind of going by in the back, the idea that the shot of him in the train and the camera's kind of just rolling with him in the train, and then it kind of stops on his cousin's face. There's just all of these different cool shots that the way that they're able to use those just stage them in certain ways that are just kind of fascinating. And the other thing is kind of in the same thing of that the shot that is kind of pretty early in the film, but it's the big shot in the trailer of Adrian Brody kind of walking up as the sparks are kind of coming in front of him. So many of those different, the idea to do these shots and just the way that they were able to, Lau Crawley, as well as Brady Corbet, the way they were able to frame and set these shots and then make sure that the cinematography, making sure that they're capturing this, just the way that they're envisioning it and getting these cool looks and the cool shots, I think is just what's really worth kind of highlighting and celebrating of this film. So for my personal ranking, I am putting The Brutalist in third, but for my prediction, I am predicting this to win, and it's one of those things where I have a hard time seeing The Brutalist only coming away with one Oscar on March 2nd, and so this is just one of those categories. I think it still has a good shot of winning, even if it isn't necessarily having the same momentum that I thought it would have. The next nominee is Dune Part 2, Cinematography by Greg Fraser. This is Greg Fraser's third Oscar nomination. He won in 2022 for the first Dune and was nominated in 2017 for Lion. Dune Part 2 was nominated for Best Cinematography at the BAFTAs and the Critics' Choice Awards. Now, Dune Part 2 has the distinction and the fun thing here of being kind of the big blockbuster of the category. Sometimes there really aren't any blockbusters in this category, and sometimes there's multiple. And there are a couple. There's another film that we're going to talk about a little bit later that maybe is almost kind of fitting into that category, but in terms of just action sci-fi blockbuster, Dune Part 2 kind of has the grip of that title here in this category. And there's just so many different shots in this film that I think are just brilliant and beautifully done. And again, so much of this, kind of going back to what I was saying in The Brutalist, is a lot of it just comes down to the way that Denis Villeneuve was able to kind of set the stage, is able to frame the scenes, right? We're talking about the big scene at the end of Timothée Chalamet and Austin Butler, kind of their duel toward the end. Just the way that they're able to kind of pan back. They have, I believe it's like the sun is kind of in the background, kind of coming into the shot, and so it's kind of creating these shadows as they're fighting. And again, and this is also kind of goes, a lot of cinematography I think kind of goes hand in hand with production design. They're two things that I think work very well in unison together. But being able to get these great looks based off of what the kind of the production design that you have in the background of that scene, I think is just brilliant. It's really well done. Dune Part 2 also does the same thing, that it kind of the continuation of what the first film does, of having all these the shots on Arrakis. You have the sand, and you have the different just kind of the outdoor shots that I think could be incredibly boring. Like, it would be, if you're just saying, like, okay, an hour of our film is just going to be filmed in these sand dunes, and they're just going to be outside in the sand, and it's going to be hot, and it's going to be sunny. Like, I think a lot of directors might not be able to have the vision, being able to kind of come together and understand how they want to still frame that and how they want to shoot it to still look as beautiful as Dune does. Because you would think that just all of these shots of just staring at sand would be something that just get repetitive and maybe a little bit boring, but each shot is so new and so full of life. You have the dunes, where they're kind of like the hills, and so you're getting kind of the depth to the cinematography. You're getting these shadows, and it's not just this big blank canvas. You're getting so much kind of characterization in terms of the kind of the production design of of the sand dunes, that I think is really impressive. There's a lot of scenes as well of Timothée Chalamet as he's kind of like the scene where where they're first kind of, where he's kind of taking over as, the Lisan al-Gaib, and he's taken over as kind of the messiah of this group, and the Zendaya's character kind of has the realization of, like, this isn't the same guy that I thought he was, and so you get these kind of cool shots of him kind of standing up and leading the group, and her still kind of standing up or being kind of late to kind of kneel down to people. So you get these cool shots of him kind of like leading over this group of people that I think is really well done. Just the shot of the kind of the Coliseum scene with Austin Butler that's kind of shot in this black and white, where you kind of get the introduction scenes of Austin Butler that are kind of shot in this way. Both Austin Butler and Lea Seydoux, a lot of their scenes kind of being in that black and white is just really well done. There's just so many different aspects, and there's so many things that I think you could look at this film and just say, a lot of Dune Part Two's nominations, and unfortunately I think maybe the Academy did this, but you look at so many of its nominations that it got here in Dune Part 2, you look at the ones that got in Dune Part 1, and you might just be like, oh, it's just a continuation, or, oh, they're just doing the same thing. And I don't think that's necessarily true, but sure, let's say that's the argument you want to have, that they're just doing the same thing. Sure, they're doing the same thing, but they're still doing it so well, and they're still doing it so beautifully and brilliantly, and so I love the cinematography here in Dune Part 2. So for my personal ranking, I'm putting this in first. For my prediction, I have it sliding down in third. It's just kind of a thing where I'm having a hard time seeing Dune Part 2 winning multiple of its nominations, and so I think it's going to kind of be struggling in some of these tech categories. The next nominee is Emilia Perez. Cinematography by Paul Guillaume. This is Paul Guillaume's first Oscar nomination. He previously worked with director Jacques Audiard on 2021's Paris 13th District. Emilia Perez was also nominated for Best Cinematography at the BAFTAs. And so we're continuing to do this with Emilia Perez, where I said this multiple times in all of the other videos where we've been talking about Emilia Perez, where I'm not intentionally ranking this at the bottom in every category because I don't like the film. I am being unbiased, and I'm ranking them based off of the individual thing. So, your film could be bad, but if a certain aspect of the film I think is really well done, then I'm willing to give it a higher up ranking on this. I'm not ranking these just based off how I like the film. I'm ranking them how I like the specific thing. Yet we keep coming into these categories where I don't necessarily like this particular thing that we're nominating about Emilia Perez. And this is one of the things I will admit that I think I like the cinematography a little bit more than some people do with Emilia Perez. There's a lot of people that I think most people that really hate the film, the story is the main thing they hate about. It's the script. But I do think that there's a lot of people that one of the next things that they hate the most about this film is the way it looks. And I will say that I don't hate it as much because I think that they had a distinct style and they had an idea, and I do think that they kind of executed it for the most part. A lot of Emilia Perez is kind of dark, and it's kind of there's not a lot of light. There's not a lot of, especially not natural light, but it's a lot of just kind of a lot of the scenes, even the scenes that take place in rooms, like in the houses. There's just not a lot of light, and so it's just kind of the idea of kind of just creating this darker cinematography. And so I think that's something that a lot of people just didn't like. They wanted it to be more vibrant and more colorful. And that's just not necessarily what they were going for with the film. So I do think they kind of executed on that idea of what they were doing. And I do think that it works well enough. Where I think they kind of also fall into, at least the part of the cinematography that I will give them credit for, is really, and it's the thing that they do multiple times. So it's kind of a little repetitive, but it's what they do in pretty much all of these musical numbers, because they've already kind of established this darker cinematography of things in the background kind of being, not necessarily just out of focus, but just like gradually as you're going back and back into the background, it's just getting darker and harder to see these things. And what they do during the musical numbers is essentially they keep the same dark cinematography, and then it's like they just put a spotlight on Zoe Saldana or Carlos Sofia Gascon or Selena Gomez or whoever happens to be singing that particular musical number. They kind of just, it seems like they're just kind of highlighting that person singing and then leaving the rest of the shot kind of dark. And so I do think that, again, I think Emilia Perez, the cinematography isn't my favorite, but I do think that they kind of had this idea. They had the idea of, we're kind of shooting this a little bit darker, or things in the background aren't necessarily in focus as much as, especially during the musical numbers, whoever is singing, that is kind of the focus, and that's what we're kind of bringing the attention to with the way that the lighting and with the way it's shot. So I do at least appreciate that they kind of had that vision, but there are just a lot of scenes, and there are a couple musical numbers as well, where they don't kind of execute that, and it is kind of, I don't know, there's one Selena Gomez number in particular that's just not really as lit as well. It's kind of got these kind of neon lights as kind of the background that they're trying to go for, and it just doesn't, a lot of it again just doesn't mesh. And so this is one of those things that, again, I don't like Emilia Perez. It's not not my cup of tea, but it's, I do understand. I like it a little bit more than I think a lot of people do, but I still just, I'm having a hard time, especially in a lot of these tech categories, or in the majority of its categories, unfortunately, in general, I'm having a hard time seeing why this was nominated over some other things. And so for my personal ranking, I'm putting Emilia Perez in 5th, and for my prediction, I'm putting it in 4th. The next nominee is Maria. Cinematography by Ed Lachman. This is Ed Lachman's 4th Oscar nomination, and he is still looking for his first win. He was nominated last year for El Conde, in 2016 for Carol, and in 2003 for Far From Heaven. Maria wasn't nominated at any of the main televised precursors, but was nominated at the American Society of Cinematographers. And I talked about this with the Brutalist and a little bit with Dune Part 2, but I think Maria is the best example of how just framing and placing your characters in your shot can create just a beautiful effect. And so Maria has a lot of these beautiful shots, and it's kind of this slower and a little bit more somber and just a little bit more reserved of a film, where we're just kind of following Angelina Jolie playing, the title character Maria, as she's kind of going through these rooms, and she's kind of reliving her, or retelling the story of her life, and getting kind of this, I don't want to say one last shot, but just kind of the final days or so of her career, trying to, is this as this famous opera singer, just trying to return back to the stage, and trying to sing again, and trying to, again, just kind of reliving these moments. And so there's so many different beautiful shots of her, whether she is singing on a stage or whether she's just kind of singing in her house. The way that the camera will kind of pan back and frame her in a certain way, and you're still able to see the whole room with, the light either coming in from the side, or in some scenes it's kind of like coming down like right on top of her as she's kind of, just kind of entering or exiting rooms. And it's just one of those things that you can tell that Edward Lachman, as a cinematographer, is he's one of those respected. It's starting to come to the point that where it seems like he's just one of the favorites in the Academy, kind of one of the favorites, at least in the cinematographer's branch. And it's easy to see why when you look at a lot of his films, when you watch. Especially for me, I guess I should have looked up maybe the rest of his filmography and seen maybe what else of his I've seen. But for sure, I've seen Maria now, and then I saw El Conde last year. And I think when I first watched El Conde, because I watched it before the Oscar nominations and before it was really getting any sort of buzz in cinematography, so I remember watching it back then and just thinking it was an okay film. And then once it got the cinematography nomination, I was rewatched El Conde again last year, and that's when I just realized kind of the beauty of so many of the shots of the film. And I think that's the same thing here with Maria. I think, I watched it couple months ago in kind of anticipation, watching it, thinking like, okay, I think Angelina Jolie's at that point was one of the front runners in the Best Actress category. So I watched it months ago, being like, okay, I'm gonna focus so much on Angelina Jolie's performance. Then a couple days ago, when I was rewatching this again, I was still focused on Angelina Jolie, right? She is the main character, is Maria Callas. She is so integral to the story, but I was kind of more so paying attention to just the beautiful cinematography, the shots of the film. And again, there are just so many beautiful, just kind of breathtaking shots. So many just simple things of her just kind of standing in a room, and the curtains are kind of open in a certain way, and maybe they're open in kind of multiple spots, and so you're getting sun coming in from multiple angles, but the sun coming in straight on her, and it just creates this just kind of just stunning look, as well as so many scenes of just her outside, and the camera is just kind of like on her face or something, and it maybe kind of holds there for a little bit. And I think that's one thing that Edward Lachman does really well with his cinematography, is he gets the shot and he gets this beautiful frame, and then he holds it. And credit to Pablo Larraín for being able to kind of see that vision as well, and letting the scene kind of play for a couple extra beats, getting just so we can just kind of appreciate the beauty of what we're seeing, of just this kind of this shot of kind of people in the background or something, and then we get Angelina Jolie here, and then maybe far in the distance we get some sort of monument, we get something out there that's kind of just creating the depth of these shots, and we understand that we're looking at this beautiful thing, and we're going to leave it here for a couple seconds so you can kind of appreciate what you're looking at. And that's what I think Maria, more so than I think a lot of maybe the other films in this category, I mean, I guess, Dune Part 2 obviously is easy to put this in there as well, but I think for Maria, this is like the type of film, especially with it being kind of like a period piece, there are so many just shots or stills of this film that I feel like you could just like take a screenshot of your TV and just get this printed, and like that would be a photo that you could hang on your house. And there's just so many, just the fancy, again, this is another one that goes with where I think cinematography and production design often go hand in hand, because it's just the house that she's in, or whenever she's like on the stage, singing, it just creates the production design as well as the cinematography to come together and just create such a striking visual, that the fact that you want to just be able to say, like, I would love to just have that shot right here just as like a painting that just looks like that would be a painting in someone's house. I think that is what really kind of makes Edward Lockman, I think, kind of stand out as like a cinematographer, is just the way he's able to have this vision, execute it, and then really kind of let you revel in it as well. So for my personal ranking, I'm putting Maria in 4th, and for my prediction, I'm putting it in 5th. And the final nominee is Nosferatu. Cinematography by Jaron Blosky. This is Jaron Blosky's second Oscar nomination. He was nominated in 2020 for The Lighthouse, also directed by Robert Eggers. Nosferatu won for Best Cinematography 3 days ago at the Critics' Choice Awards, and has also been nominated at the BAFTAs. And Nosferatu is one of those films that I think is beautifully shot from start to finish. Everything looks well. It is well done. In a lot of the scenes where we're kind of just following Lily Rose Depp and Nicholas Hoult and Aaron Taylor Johnson and Emma Corrin, where we're just kind of following them, or Willem Dafoe and Ralph Ineson when they come in a little bit later, we're just kind of following them as characters and following their day, and it's still well done. There's, again, that's another thing where you can kind of give credit to kind of the framing of these scenes, that it's really well done. But for Nosferatu, in terms of the cinematography, almost entirely what we're nominating it for is all of the scenes either featuring Count Orlok or where he is just kind of still a presence in the scene. Those are the scenes, because it's not necessarily done in this, it's not really black and white, it's just kind of really muted, and so I think it's kind of almost a little bit more like blues that are kind of coming in with some of the shots. But it's just kind of a darker, but uses a good contrast. It's not like Emilia Perez, where the screen is just kind of dark and everything kind of is just blending into this darkness. There's a brilliant contrast with the Nosferatu cinematography, of where we have this darker scene, but there's so much light, there's so much, whether it's Lily Rose Depp in her white dress, or whether it's the scene I'm thinking of particular is the opening scene, right, where she's kind of standing on one side in her white dress, and then you've got the curtain kind of flowing by on the side, and as it kind of furls, you can kind of see that there's no one there, but then it kind of comes back, and all of a sudden now you're seeing the silhouette of Nosferatu coming through. There's so many scenes like that I think are just beautifully, again, I say this multiple times, I think it's a big part of what makes good cinematography is the staging of your shot. So I think the staging of that, I think, is just creating a striking visual to look at. But when we're talking about Nosferatu, we also just have to talk about so many of the other scenes, the way the shadows, I mean, like I just mentioned in that scene, the shadow kind of coming in and out, the shadow of the scene, the big scene I think that a lot of people talk about when they talk about the cinematography is, I think it's if I remember right, it's right before Nosferatu starts doing the 3 nights where he's coming to visit Ellen, is that her name? Lily Rose Depp's character. But it's the shot of the city, and then the shadow of the hand kind of stretching across. I think that's a big thing that a lot of people will point out. For me, I think one of the most striking pieces of cinematography that like kind of blew my mind when I was watching it was it's the scene, it's when he's coming to visit Lily Rose Depp the last night, and it's the same thing. It's the shadow of his hand creeping up against the wall, and then the shadow turning the doorknob. Like, there's so many just cool and brilliant shots that I think just create such a striking and beautiful to look at film. And that's the big thing again with Nosferatu, is it's not just that it's dark, because there are a lot of scenes that it is dark, but it's a beautiful contrast of the dark and the light coming together, and it creates, again, not only just these opportunities to kind of play with shadows, but also just to kind of get you to appreciate kind of the darker scenes, or the darker kind of areas of the shot, because of the way that the light is coming in. I think it's just a natural, beautiful contrast that works really well together. And there is one other scene that I really want to talk about in terms of the beautiful cinematography, and it's as Nicholas Hoult is going to to Count Orlok's castle, and kind of that scene of him kind of in the middle of the road, and the trees lining up on the side, and the snow is kind of falling down, and the carriage is kind of coming in and opens up, and trying to get him into the carriage. There's just that scene alone is so striking and so memorable that was one of those that when I was watching this again at this point, I mean, Nosferatu only came out month and a half, 2 months ago at this point, but it was still one of those scenes that when I was seeing that, I didn't know if Nosferatu was necessarily going to be some big Oscar player, but that was the scene where I saw that and I said, this has to be in contention for cinematography. Like, this absolutely has to get a nomination, and again, has to be in contention for the win. And kind of the last thing that I want to talk about in terms of Nosferatu, in terms of its cinematography, is if you've been paying attention, you can see kind of where I have it in my personal ranking and where I have it in my prediction. This is one of those things where a couple of days ago it did win Best Cinematography at the Critics' Choice Awards, and I'm not going to act like I'm now just kind of being a front runner and saying like, oh, because it win here, I'm now predicting it to win the Oscar. This is one of those that I do think it has the momentum, and I do think it's gaining momentum. I just don't know necessarily if the Academy is going to love Nosferatu as much as they love The Brutalist. And so I do think we're at this point where I think a lot of people still think that Dune Part 2 has a really good chance in this category, and I do as well, and I do kind of hope it does, because like you saw, it was my favorite of the cinematography in this category. But this is one of those areas where I do think we're getting kind of close here. I think this could be a two-horse race. I think this could be Nosferatu v. The Brutalist once we get to the ceremony, and right now I do think that I'm having a hard time seeing The Brutalist fall completely off the face of the earth and only get like one category, one win. And so I do think that this is a category that I think that even though Nosferatu is surging, it's going to be interesting to see if we just kind of get to that point where if Nosferatu is surging and can take over where The Brutalist is, or if The Brutalist kind of has enough momentum to stay strong and stay in the lead. And so for my personal ranking, I'm putting Nosferatu in second, and for my prediction, I'm putting it in second. And that's it. Thank you so much for watching this video. Let me know down below in the comments what you thought of these nominees in this category, and let me know if there was any films that you thought were like a big, massive snub in this category. For me, I think Conclave was one that for sure, the cinematography was so beautiful in Conclave, I would have loved to see that get in here. But just let me know your thoughts on those down below, and also just let me know what category you're most looking forward to seeing a category breakdown video of next. And if you'd like to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss those upcoming videos, I would greatly appreciate it, and have a great day.